everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today you all chose my adventure while I was visiting Southern California, and with over 70% of the vote, you all chose for me to visit Brea Tar Pits. So let's get to it. I'm actually starting this adventure at the lake that's just in front of the museum. And what's fascinating about it is there's actually oil seeps coming into this lake. In fact, you can see the sheen and bubbles coming up where there's currently oil seeping to the surface in this lake. And of course, they did this diorama with the mammoths getting stuck here in one of these tar pits. But this is an active pit or an active tar seep, which is really cool to see. The one thing I'll tell you that you wouldn't be able to know through watching this is that the smell is intense. So I don't have smell-o-vision, but you can see all the bubbles, and all this is kind of sulfury, rotten egg smelling gases coming up associated with the hydrocarbons or oil and gas that's underneath the whole Los Angeles Valley. And we'll talk more about the geology and about that as we continue on. So the Brea Tar Pit sits within a park, and there's a portion that's a free park to walk around, and they have a bunch of pits you can explore, but they also have the George Page Museum behind us where you can learn more about the fossils, and we'll go in there in a second. But one of the things they have that's great out here is information about the pits for anybody who comes here. So if you don't want to pay to go into the museum, you can come here, walk around the park, and you can learn about things like when mammoths used to walk here on Wilshire Boulevard, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with Wilshire from everything from, I believe, Tom Petty songs to just popular culture here in the Los Angeles area. The plaques here show things like what kind of animals did we have here? Columbian mammoths, saber-toothed cats, camels. Yep, camels actually evolved in North America. Pretty cool, right? Giant ground sloth and short-faced bears. And then it talks about what we still have. So those are the ones that are extinct, but there's still rabbits, frogs, bats, coyote, and insects. So those are all things they found while excavating here in the tar pits. I like this picture. It says, you're standing just 30 feet from Wilshire Boulevard where Columbian mammoths walked 20 to 40,000 years ago, back when Los Angeles was wetter, cooler, and greener. Wow, pretty cool. I love the look of the entrance of this museum. They have the sculptures on either side, and then on top they have a bunch of sculptures showing the various animals that they found here and how they envisioned some of these tar pits and the animals that are getting trapped in them. Really cool. All right, let's go inside the actual museum and learn a little bit more about this. All right, made it into the museum. It was $15 to come in. If you have military ID, student, teacher, it's $12, and I think they have a couple other discounts, but really excited to be in here. And check this out right off the bat. It's a display from a portal to the Ice Age in the heart of Los Angeles. That's the one thing I can't get over, is that literally in the middle of Los Angeles, in the middle of the city, and here's this amazing fossil discovery. So I want to turn around to show myself, and then also you can get a quick idea about the scale of some of these creatures. So this is a Harlan's ground sloth. So these are one of these giant sloths that used to live here in Southern California, 30,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, even up to 10,000 years ago. It's amazing to picture creatures like this walking around in what is today LA. Wow. I like this because you can really get the size of so many of the creatures here. So I can stand really close to this fossil of a mastodon, and you can see how big these would have been. Now you put muscles and skin and fat and all this stuff, fur. These things were gigantic, and not just here, but look on this side. This is a bison. So we have bison today. You can see them in places like Yellowstone, or here in California, you can go over to Catalina Island, and there's actually a herd of bison there as well. But they used to be much bigger back in the ice ages. Really interesting to see. Here's a display showing how the bones have weathered, or what's happened to them in the pit, from various things, from creatures chewing on them to wear and tear, to the types of creatures they've actually found here. So in these pits, they found California saber-toothed cats, right? Californian condors. They found a peccary, which is like a boar, a mountain lion. So there's a tooth of a mountain lion, coyotes, badgers, foxes, gophers. You can see all the various animals. So I'm going to go slow through here so you can see everything that they found. Pronghorns, camels. So they found camel skulls here. If folks have seen some of my other videos, one of the things that's really interesting is I don't think people realize that camels actually started in the Americas and then migrated out from here. Same with horses. So horses and camels are actually, during the ice ages, were native to North America. Really interesting. And here's a sloth. So we had sloths as well. So I often think about in the last 100,000 years during the ice ages, I imagine Los Angeles and Southern California would look a lot like what we picture the savannas of Africa to look like. More wet, large creatures roaming like an American lion. So these are extinct, so there were lions here as well. And check out all the different California saber-toothed cats. So I know they're often called saber-toothed tigers, but it turns out they're not related to the tiger. I believe they're related to a lion, but we'll find out more about that as we continue. They found so many wolves here, and we'll talk about that story as we continue through. Here's some bison, a California turkey. That's cool. Here's a look at one of these saber-toothed cats. It looks like he's in a position about to pounce, just like my cat used to do all the time. And here's a little bit more about those. Their teeth are so impressive. And other than saber-toothed cats, probably the most recognizable fossil that comes out of here for most people is the Colombian mammoth, which lived for about 1.6 million to about 10,000 years ago. So that's basically what we call the time of the Pleistocene, coming to what we call the time of the Holocene, which started about 10,000 years ago, or the end of the last major ice age. But you can see how impressive these creatures are. And let me show you for scale how large this is. Check this out in relation to myself. This is like 2.5 of me standing up there. What an impressive sight to see. We so often think of camels, we think of places like Egypt or the Middle East. However, all the camels really came from here. And you can see one of these big camels behind me that are now extinct, but used to roam all over the western United States up until the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. The size of these things are huge. These look, I've been around camels. This looks a lot larger than the camels I've been around. Also in the pits, because they're tar, it actually preserves pine cones and types of trees that used to grow here. So they can get a real good look at the ecosystem or the environment in which these animals used to live, including things like invertebrates. What kind of snails did they have? What kind of bugs did they have? Look at that. Dragonflies they found in the tar. That's cool. A dung beetle they found in the tar. Diving beetles or water bugs they found in the tar. And of course, everybody's favorite, not really, stink bugs. One of the cool things they have here is to talk about the tar. But the tar is what actually trapped a lot of these animals. So you can think of this tar as, picture having a sandbox full of oil, and very thick oil or asphalt. And so it'd be like having quicksand with asphalt that you can't get out of. So quicksand's already bad enough, but then you have sticky tar and you get that all over you and you can't move. So it was a double whammy for these animals, and that's how they got stuck. And this is very difficult to pull up, which is interesting. So, and here's another one. So you can pull up different ones. Oh, you can hear me struggling here a little bit because it's not easy. And the more weight you have, oh my goodness, the harder it is to do. Woo, that's a workout. We'll go take a look at some of the pits outside and talk a little bit more about the geology involved with capturing these. And I hope they have an exhibit here in the museum. I haven't even made it past the first room yet because there's so many cool things to see here and so much to learn about and so much I want to share with you all. As we saw earlier, there's so many types of animals that were captured in these tar pits. And so here's examples of birds that they found here, from caracara, which is a type of predatory bird, to a turkey, to a condor, to an eagle. Here's something specifically called the Brea condor, another eagle, a type of vulture that they found here. A stork. Whoa, that's cool. I had no idea. An errant eagle, which is also extinct now, and a fragile eagle. One thing I'll say that the tar pits have done for us as far as understanding history and paleontology goes is it's really preserved a lot of the animals that we would have never known about, except that they were actually trapped inside of these tar pits. And speaking of trapped inside the tar pits, these are all direwolf skulls that have been excavated here. So notice there has to be hundreds of direwolf skulls here, and I've heard they have many, many more in the back. So why so many direwolves, right? Look at those in all different sizes. Let me come back to why they got trapped, but let me show you what these direwolves look like. I would not want to run across a pack of these. They are pretty intense looking. They are extinct now. They lived here during that same time as the mammoth and the camels and the horses and the mastodons. They hunt in packs just like wolves do today. So with that, and why are there so many direwolf skulls? Well, here's a nice example. Here's a ground sloth that's been stuck in dying or died in some of this tar, and the wolves come and start eating on it and then get stuck themselves and sink and can't get out and actually can't get the tar off of themselves. So they eventually also die from that and end up stuck here. So that's why there's so many of these direwolf skulls. One of the other fascinating things I didn't know is that there is actually an American lion. There were lions here in Southern California and the Western US as well during, similar to the mammoths, they go all the way back to, somewhere around 1.6 million years ago, the start of the Pleistocene. And check this out, they actually have a fossil lab here. And look, they have a mammoth skull that they're excavating right now, right in the middle. Look at that, and you can see its 2 teeth, and then its tusks would be down here at the bottom. That is really cool. Here shows a replica of that skull they're excavating, and you can see what part it is there. So how do they actually go about excavating this? And I'm hoping we'll see this in some pits, but this is all really solidified, so it's not still tarry. It's basically become a rock or lithified in most cases. So they actually have to excavate it out, much like they do other fossils, and you'll see they have to map it out with what they're seeing. They start digging out the individual fossils. But one thing to point out is look at the density of fossils in these tar pits. It's amazing how many creatures got stuck in these, and they're able to recover and find out about. From there, they have to clean the bones, they have to identify the bones, and you can see they just have rows and rows and rows of discoveries. Which, with such an abundant fossil trove, they can actually learn a lot about animals. Like, they can take a look at a healthy hip for a saber-toothed cat compared to one that's got arthritis, right? Or hip dysplasia. So they can actually understand more and more about the creatures and how they live through time, and even health issues they have, because there's so many fossils here, which really gives us an intimate look at what life was like during that time and how these creatures potentially lived and what they may have even suffered from, like hip dysplasia. This is one of the best displays about carbon dating I've ever seen. How do they know the age of some of the stuff here? And that is through carbon dating. Nitrogen gets bombarded by cosmic rays, becomes carbon-14, gets incorporated into CO2 in the atmosphere, and then the CO2 eventually becomes part of plant life. Because we know how long it takes for carbon-14 to go back to nitrogen, we can start dating how much carbon-14 is left, and that's what they're representing here is what they call radiocarbon half-life scale. And so the black on here is actually for carbon-14. The blue here is showing the amount of nitrogen that's producing. So it starts decay, what we call decaying, so there's less and less carbon-14, more nitrogen. And because we know those half-lives, a half-life of carbon-14 to nitrogen, in other words, when it's at 50% is at 5,730 years old. Then the next half-life to go from that to the next one is somewhere around, I don't know, 15,000 years old, but eventually it takes altogether about 45,000 years for all carbon to become nitrogen. So if we can date the plant material associated with the fossil finds here, we can start finding out, okay, well, maybe this plant material is 4,000 years old and it's buried with these animals. Okay, that would have been 4,000 years ago. In this case, we know it's much older. We know it's after 10,000 years. So they can take a look at the plant material and they can start dating that material as it's associated with these animals. And so they can actually date the bones as well. And you can see where they've cut out the bones to do carbon dating to get an idea about the age of the different mastodons or horses or direwolves they've seen. Really cool and very important for us understanding time. Really nice display done here at the museum on age dating. Something I'll talk a bit more about once we get outside back on the grounds is the idea that these tar pits are here because there's a bunch of oil fields, and there used to be oil fields dotting all of Southern California. In fact, there's kind of three big things that made Southern California we have today, and that is oil, which I think many people forget that this was one of the central oil producing provinces really in the world for a period of time. Citrus and of course Hollywood really made Southern California what Southern California is today, and eventually I'll do an episode on those. But this shows an interesting juxtaposition between where they're mining this asphalt, right, and these tar pits to get the fossils out from these ancient oil fields that seep to the surface while they're producing oil throughout this entire area. And look how different LA used to look back in 1913 to 1915. Here's a cool timeline showing 55,000, 10,000 years ago. These animals are being trapped in the tars. 1870s, there's an asphalt mine here. So they used to use asphalt for a lot of things, including for roads, of course. But I know my grandma grew up here, and she said they used to come get the asphalt and chew on it when they had sick stomachs, like gum. Interesting, right? But they used asphalt for lots of things. Eventually, geologist William Denton comes out here, examines the fossils, confirms there's fossils here, and then, of course, they eventually dig them out. But along the way, they actually find oil here as well. And so you have a huge oil boom that takes place here in the LA Valley, brings a lot of people and a lot of wealth into this area. In fact, they're still producing oil fields here now. So how do they excavate these? They actually cut out a block of this asphalt. Now, what I want to show here in this asphalt is this is just not a pool, just asphalt. There's actually gravel and sand. So as I mentioned before, you can really think about this as almost like quicksand mixed with asphalt, sticky goo that would just make it very difficult for the animals to get out. They would step in it, they would sink like quicksand, but then they had the added complexity that you're trying to move out of this really thick sludge, like I was showing when I was pulling on the levers. So with that, so many animals get trapped here, right? The prey get trapped in here, and then you get a bunch of predators coming in. And I mentioned the dire wolves earlier. The dire wolves would come in packs and try to eat the prey because they thought, oh, this is easy eating, and then they would get stuck. And then other animals, saber-toothed cats, would come in going, oh, look, easy prey. They would get stuck. Maybe other prey would come along and get stuck as well. So there's a lot that happens here, and that gives us this wealth of information. And you can see how many fossils and the density of fossils. And just this small block that's probably 3 feet by 3 feet, a meter by meter. Okay, I made this circle around. So the museum is set up as really a square, so you can work your way all the way around the square. And I've come back to where I've started at. But now what I want to do is go learn a little bit more and go actually visit the pits outside. So you can see what they've excavated here. They have these examples, beautiful exhibits about the animals they found. But I want to go learn a little bit more about the geology and actually see the pits where the animals came out of. So here's a nice map coming from the museum where we're just leaving. Coming up, here's where we're at, where actually the first fossil was found. That's pretty cool, right where I'm at. Pretty neat. And we're going to go walk around and take a look at some of the pits out here where all these fossils came from. I came actually back out to the lake pit to start talking about some of the geology here as well. And what they have is a nice example of a cross section, or really a block diagram, showing what the earth looks like below our feet. So we can start with, here's the lake we're looking at here, which is right over here. We see the mammoths at. I can definitely smell from here. And there's a series of layers going underneath. Now, the layers the animals are trapped in is this uppermost layer, which was a series of rivers and lakes. And as the hydrocarbons seeped up, they would pool in those areas. And the question is, how did they come up and why is it here in the first place? Well, it turns out we're above a bunch of oil fields, and those oil fields were set up or started to get set up about 10 million years ago as the San Andreas Fault started activating in this area, and it created a series of what we are known as anticlines. Now, this whole area used to be buried underneath a lot of water, which meant we had ocean organisms that eventually, when they get buried deep enough, can get hot enough and create hydrocarbons or oil and gas. And that oil and gas likes to pool or get trapped in basically upside down bowls because it's buoyant. We've all seen oil float on water. So in the subsurface or underground, the oil always is trying to get to the surface of the earth, but there's barriers along the way and it gets trapped or gets pulled in these anticlines. So think of, like I said, an upside down bowl, like an upside down cereal bowl. Eventually, various things can happen from faulting, fractures, pressure, could actually allow the hydrocarbons, the oil, to seep up all the way to the surface and not be trapped in the subsurface anymore, or it could slowly leak out through time, and that's what creates these tar pits up here. And so these are coming, and because things like gravels and sands, riverbed and lake deposits have a lot of sand in them, which are very porous and permeable, the oil can pool in those areas, which create these, again, for lack of a better word, basically oil, tar, quicksand traps, right? So we all know about quicksand. So again, add oil with that and it's going to be very difficult to get out of. This really is a nice display showing what they think is happening here. And of course, as we saw in the picture in the museum, oil really helped bring California to where it is today. And there's still oil beneath our feet, so it's still slowly leaking up, which is exactly what we see making up the surface of this lake, and we can actually see the bubbles out there as the oil's coming up to the surface. Okay, from here we're going to go walk around the park, which is free to walk around, and you can go see where some of the excavation pits are and where they got some of these blocks out of, where they were taking the fossils out of. One of the interesting things you'll see here are actually modern tar seeps, and so you can imagine if there's animals walking through something like this, they can get stuck and get tar on them as well. But they actually rope these things off or close them off and try to cover up the natural tar seeps, but you'll actually see all the tar on this. So seeps are still happening today. And what is so fascinating is seeing these areas where these seeps are still popping up all over the place. So it makes me wonder, if I dug down deep here, could this been a historic seep where there could be a bunch of mammals stuck down here? I bet we would find fossils if we dug deep enough down in this section. So if you do come to the park, watch your step. You may end up with asphalt on your shoes. On the grounds, they have things like this short-faced bear that I'm not sure about this position he's sitting in, that you can see what some of the animals look like. They have sculptures here. They have an area that talks about the Pleistocene garden, what plant life looked like in the LA basin 1.6 million to about 10,000 years ago. That's the Pleistocene epoch. Gives you an idea about what kind of plants you could have seen here at that time, and then what kind of animals you could see as well. And they'll have pictures and they have some sculptures around. What I want to do is go check out some of these excavation pits so you can see where some of the fossils actually came from here on property. Welcome to pits 3, 4, 61, and 67. These are actually the first pits you get to after leaving the museum here. And it says there are 3 pits dug here from 1913 to 1915. And what's fascinating about this is they have recorded animals over a period of 20,000 years that were trapped in here. And that's pretty interesting. And probably what was going on is you have one pool set up and it's gathering animals, and through time, as they die and settle in, there's more hydrocarbons coming in, which bring gas and basically stir this up through kind of maybe liquefaction, which is like when you're at the beach and you put your foot in the sand and the waves go back and forth and your foot slowly sinks. By adding that fluid coming through, it actually decreases the strength of the material and things can sink into it. And I think that's what's happening here. So you get a jumble of all kinds of different creatures. So usually in geology, we'll have the youngest creatures on top, the oldest on the bottom. But because of this action in each of these pits, you may have the youngest on the bottom and maybe the oldest on top, because these things are being churned up through time, which is also probably why it was very hard for the big animals to get out of these pits. There would be a bit of liquefaction going on as they stepped in. They would shake down or sink down into this mud as well. So they probably didn't have to sink very far, but all that together would create a death trap for these creatures. And we talked about how they cut the blocks of tar out and move them. Well, this is exactly what that looks like once they crate them afterwards. So these are all blocks of tar from different pits out here that they're slowly working on. And so they're going to open these up, they're going to slowly work through them and see what kind of animals they can find. Things like a camel. And this shows that project a little better. So they start digging, right? They find the fossils. Oh, we got to stop, we don't want to destroy the fossils. Then they slowly dig them out. They put wooden crates around them. They get a crane, take it out of the pit, and then the paleontologists and volunteers go in and start working on it. And here, you'll hear in the background, he's actually chipping away at one of these asphaltene blocks and looking for fossils. Pretty neat. You can come here where they're actively digging and working and see what they're doing. And across from the boxes where they're currently excavating fossils, we can come on the other side and see where they've done a lot of work, and they actually excavated this. This is pit number 9, and I believe this is where they found some mammoths out of. And indeed, this is pit 9 is where they found some of the biggest fossils of Columbian mammoth out of here. A 12-foot tall, 11-ton Columbian mammoth came out of here, and it sounds like maybe one of the most complete ones was found out of here as well, which is really interesting. And so this doesn't look like that big of an area, but if you imagine these things stacking over time as the skin and the muscles disappear off the bones, right? The bones just start compacting more and more. And so you can get a full mammoth in a very small area, and multiple mammoths from what it sounds like. Such a cool and unique place for understanding geology and the history of life on Earth. And here's another pit. So if you come here and visit, you can come around and learn about these different pits. You can read more about them. Again, you have to pay for parking if you park at the parking lot here, and I think that was $18, and then you can walk around this area. There may be other parking. We are in greater downtown LA area, so it may all be paid parking, but you don't have to pay to go in the museum, although I highly recommend it. That being said, if you come here, you can just walk around the park and learn a bit about the ancient life that was here and some about the geology. So we're at pit 13 now, and this is apparently where they found one of these giant ground sloths and an ancient bison as well out of this pit. And I'll go around the corner here. It does say that the oldest fossils here at pit 13 are 20,000 years old, at the most recent being 8,000 years. And this was also 1913 to 1915 excavation. Ooh, and they found an American lion in here. And here's that pit, right? So you can see there's actually seepage still coming out today. You can actually see somebody lost a soccer ball. A couple soccer balls, unfortunately, it looks like, have been lost over here. Goal! Into the tar pit. Oh, fascinating. So I didn't think about this, but it makes perfect sense. It actually says tread lightly because there's still animals being caught in the tar here in this tar pit. Interesting. And I found some of my friends here, giant ground sloths, who I could probably learn a lot from by just sometimes slowing down. Pretty cool to have these statues here. And I just talked to a paleontologist here. They do have a spot where we can see into one of the pits where they're excavating. So let's go take a look at that. So from pit 3, 4, 61, 67, you can walk down this path, but you can come down here to pit 91 and you can actually look down into one of the excavated areas, and they show the number of animals that have come out of here. 73 saber-toothed cats, 56 dire wolves, coyotes, ancient bison, western horses, 1 mastodon, camels, bears, jaguars. Oh, we didn't know there were jaguars here. That's new. And then ground sloths. How cool is that? All right, let's go take a look at this. So they have viewing windows, and you can see where they've actually covered up some areas where they're working, but you can see bones down there. Let me jump to the next window. You can actually see the remains down there where they were digging some bones up, but you can see how they still have to wrestle with the oil coming to the Earth's surface as they're digging these out. It's one of the reasons they excavate them. They can pull them out. They don't have to worry about the continuous seepage messing with their digs. And they've already found so many animals in here, and it looks like there's many more to be found. Amazing. Here is another picture about the geology, and we saw this image before at the lake pit, but what I want to show you is here shows some of those pits like what we saw in the museum where they were doing digging, but you can see the oil fields in the background. So this oil and tar is coming up, and that's what we actually see right down here, still coming up today. So funny story, one of the docents in a previous trip here was telling me how they'll have people in the LA Valley call them and tell them, hey, your tar is leaking from La Brea. Now they could be tens of miles, 20 miles away, really far away, and they call asking them to come get their tar, not understanding that it's actually the geology underneath them. All of the LA Valley sits over huge oil deposits, or what were once huge oil deposits. They've obviously been produced for quite a while. Well, we've come full circle. We've checked out the museum, we've checked out the park. I hope you learned a lot. I sure did. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, you all know what to do. I look forward to going with you on the next adventure. Who knows where that's going to take us? Maybe I'll do another survey and see where you all would like me to go. I do appreciate everybody who responded to that survey on this video that got me to come here to La Brea Tar Pits. What a cool place. All right, with that being said, everybody take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.